Hey everybody, welcome to Watches with Dennis, and I probably 2 seconds late as I was scrambling around this morning. I'm actually hosting people later today, so I was in the process of cleaning, which is why I'm sweating, and we'll resume cleaning when I am done with this live stream. But for the time being, welcome everyone. Today we are going to discuss Gérald Genta, more specifically a number of his designs. And yes, we will talk about the Royal Oak and the Nautilus because those are the two most famous designs, very much hype pieces in this day and age. However, he designed a lot of different watches, especially I think noteworthy after he started his own brand. But obviously, we can't cover all of them. He had a lot of iterations on a variety of things. He had a very expansive career, essentially, as far as I know, design wise in watches from the mid 1950s to around 2000 or so, as I think when he started to sell off his company. So, with all of that said, that will be our focus today. Good morning, Kevin. Welcome to the live stream. Hope you are having a really good weekend. So, just in terms of like housekeeping stuff, like I often do when I open it, and since I'm cleaning today, we're in the G-Shock because I don't feel like putting more scratches than I normally do on my other watches. So, this is the one I do for yard work and also when it's time to do extensive house cleaning. We used to do these, we call them game nights because we're not clever. So, because we play games at them. And we used to do these monthly, pretty much like 10 to 12, 10 or 11 a year until the pandemic. And now we probably do one once a quarter. And it was probably a group of four of us and we'd rotate houses. But we've only been rotating between a couple of us at this stage. So it's sort of my turn to host is why I'm doing it. So anyway, I only had one video out since the last live stream. I did the Paris 2024 Omega watch reveal, the 300M. I'm guessing maybe they'll have other Olympic themed watches as they go along, but they have the special edition 300M. So I put that video out maybe 3 days ago at this point. And not much else to say beyond what I saw on that watch and that I said in the video, other than comments have been mixed. Some people seem to think it's decent or good looking, but maybe not something they buy. And then there are others who find it extremely ugly. I'm kind of in the middle, I guess, a little more to the like, I wouldn't buy it. Like, even if it was the price of a regular 300M, I wouldn't buy it. So it's just not for me, though I don't think it's a repulsive watch. They just made a few design choices I thought were somewhat odd. But anyway, so that video is out. It's just like 4.5 minutes long, just with the stock photos from the Omega site, because obviously I haven't handled the watch yet. So that's really it. I've been really busy work-wise. Good things, but I can't really speak to any of that yet. But hopefully by the next video, I'll be able to share some more information. I don't think there'll be any major impacts on the channel. But obviously, when I'm busy, I can't produce as many videos, and that's sort of the scenario that I've been living under. And I think that's pretty much it. So as a reminder to folks, I do have a membership thing, a membership club. We call it the 99-cent club. I only have one tier and it's 99 cents. So I put a link in the chat if you are interested in joining that. If you're not interested in joining that, but you'd like to chat about watches like text-wise, forum style, I do have a Discord. It's free. So I've got an invite in the chat. That invite link I think is good for 30 days. So anyone who's watching this on record, I think the last few I just grabbed really quick, and by default it does like a 7-day link. So you have to go through some steps to make it more like a permanent. You used to not have to, because I used to give out permanent links on my other Discord. But anyway, this one's focused on watches, and we've added a few people over the last week, so it's a lot more active now than it was. So people share photos, and we chat about some of the new stuff and like thoughts on releases and things like that. So anyway, it's pretty fun if you want to do more than just consume, like watching me blab at you. But for those of you that want me to blab at you, let us begin with this discussion on Gérald Genta. So I do have a link in the video description. I'm not going to load up that article to show you guys because I think the main thing you'll be interested in is the photos. So I'm going to go ahead and start throwing those things up on the screen. I'm going to try basically to go in chronological order. The article was not in chronological order. So this morning I went through and I tried to figure out when these releases came out. Some of them, there's some overlap, and I'll try and point some of that out when we reach that. But anyway, so we'll kind of go through. I'll try if we have the time. I'll try and get through all of them because I think there are only something like I have tabs. You'll see, as always, I have tabs loaded. So I've got something like 10 to 12 tabs loaded of watches. So those are the ones we'll discuss. And it'll hit all the major things. Some of you feel free to suggest in chat if there's something I didn't name that wasn't in that article. But it covered all the main ones I knew about and a few that I'd never heard of. So I think it'll be pretty good. And hey, Tuna, welcome to the live stream. Hope things are going well for you this morning. Well, morning, my time at least. So let me go ahead and throw this this image up. So this is the Universal Genève Pole Router. Now, this is a watch that I think when I first started collecting, I heard about. I don't remember. I think it was one of the podcasters on Hodinki's podcast at the time. I think it was the main host. Was completely enamored with, like, I think it was his wedding watch or something. So he was very enamored with the Pole Router. So that's probably why I always heard about it a lot. And I did eventually look it up, but and it never really did anything for me. But I know some people have been kind of hyping it. I don't believe it's produced currently, but because I think I've either seen or heard some people wish that it would be revived. But anyway, as near as I understand it, so he did this. Gérald Genta did this design in his early 20s. So I think this was around 1954, 53, 54 time period, because he was 23 when he did it. And so this was sort of like his first, not his first design, but his first major brand design that he got to do. So for those not familiar, and I was not, so this is from that article that is in the link in the description. He was asked to design a watch that would commemorate the Scandinavian airline systems. And so he did, and they had flown, apparently they had a route which flew over the North Pole. So he designed the watch and it's named Pole Router, and that's why. So, but as you can see from the image on the screen, it's not a very complicated watch, a very simple design. So I think probably the most interesting aspect is there's sort of like this coin edging. You can hear, I'll use my mouse. There's sort of this coin edging on the chapter ring that you can see at each hour part. So that's supposed to have aided in the legibility when trying to read the watch in low light conditions. So that's probably fairly unique aspect to it. But otherwise, I think this is pretty basic to us nowadays. You know, we got a crosshair pattern on the dial, and it's a 3-hander, and that's it. It is what it is. Very small watch. This was just under 34.5 millimeters. So I was going to say just under 35 millimeters. So again, of the era, not an unusual size as well. But that was really his first big sort of break, I guess you would say, with a Universal Genève. Well, I believe the name still operates today. Back in the 50s, this was a huge brand, a big player in the watch space. So anyway, I've always heard a lot of positive things about it. I like simple dress watches. This obviously is somewhat more of a sports style to it, but not a design necessarily that I'm particularly enamored with. I like the coin edging, but to me, that starts to get into obviously this was, I think, first, but like if I was to go something with that style at this point, I personally would lean more towards like an Omega Constellation watch, but that's just because it's got some other aesthetics that I happen to enjoy. So let me catch up with chat because I have to manage my windows here and to let you know what's all in that guide. I didn't have enough time to memorize the guide, nor would I have even bothered to try. So Koji says, I was starting off with the favorite design. Okay, well, it's all downhill from here, Koji. So feel free to leave whenever you wish. And again, I've heard a lot of people praise it. This watch, I don't know, the article I'm referencing at the time, I don't think it's dramatically different now. When was this article from? I say as I don't show you the article. Okay, it's from this year. Okay, that's nice. All right. So the price for getting one of those, and I need to note the Constellation is going to come up later because I mentioned it, and there was, I believe, a hand to be played by Genta in those designs. $2,000. Here, I'll throw it back on the screen. So $2,000, you can find these vintage ones around that price point, US dollars. So, I mean, if you want to get into Genta, it is relatively obtainable. I remember like pre-pandemic, these were closer to 1,200. It was often the discussion point. So they did catch, there was some growth with there. I think was more people wanted to experience Genta after hearing and seeing so much about Royal Oaks and Nautilus. And they kind of started to go down a route where most of us aren't in a position to buy Royal Oak and Nautilus, especially secondhand market pricing that happened during that time period. So Kevin says, all the rain we've been having has washed away our drought in Polk County. Well, we are in the midst of a heat wave here in Kansas. I went out walking yesterday evening, like at 7 p.m. and thought, oh, this is a good time to go. And I actually didn't bother to check my phone until I was actually leaving the house. I still did it. I did my little 3-mile route. but it was 98 at the time. And I looked, and it wasn't going to get down below 95 until 10 p.m. So I wasn't going to wait that long because then I wouldn't be able to see anymore. So let's see. Tuna says the poll router. Genta must have had a very long career. Yes. So that being his first major release in the mid 50s. And then I think he sold off his company around 2000 or so. And then I believe he died sometime around 2012, 2013, I think. So yes, very long career. And Neff has joined us and says, I have a poll router. It's a very nice micro rotor. Was my grandfather's. Okay, I didn't know it had a micro rotor in it. That Genta does have a fondness for thin watches, though. And we will be exploring that a little bit later on as we move. So let's move to the next watch. I mentioned it just a little bit ago about the Constellation, though this is not the design I particularly like. So when I said I'd get something different than the poll router, I didn't exactly mean this one in the cushion case, but Genta did do a design for Omega. This I did not know before getting ready for this video. So just in terms of some background, at this point, we're still in the 50s, but barely. So 1959 is the year. Omega has decided that they have a number of generic models that are kind of languishing in the catalog, and a revamp is needed. So they brought in Genta to take a look at the Constellation collection and see what he could do to kind of gussy it up and make it popular again. So the design itself, as you can see, again, is simple. This does have a day date, so the complications have expanded. But what Genta provided was he wanted to change the case shape. So this is what I saw listed as being referred to as the C case. So it's which was inspired by some other designs, and that's Constellation style designs, I suppose, because that's where it gets its name. So the Constellation, as I mentioned, I like the modern ones more than this particular aesthetic. It's had a lot of changes over the years. In fact, Omega, maybe other than the Speedmaster line, and then we're really only sticking with moon watches, a lot of their collection has changed its looks over the years. Look at early Seamasters versus what most of the catalog is at this point. Very, very different changes. So the Constellation has gone through a lot of revisions. This is not a very common one. My understanding is you don't tend to run into these very much. Probably why I was unaware of this. Shopping around, looking at Constellations on Chrono 24, I don't recall encountering this before. But anyway, still early in his career, fairly simple design. They're calling it the C case. I view this as more of a cushion case style. I get turtle vibes when I look at this, but that's probably because I've seen far more Seikos than I have Constellations with this particular case shape. So, but again, a big brand, very prestigious brand now and for the time period. So Genta, his trajectory is on the rise, even though he's not really shown, in my opinion, yet very much of what he can actually accomplish, setting aside what may be going on here with the movement and the like. But an important part of his history. So let's jump to the first one because we're kind of moving chronologically that you all definitely know. Even if you don't know anything about watches, you know about this watch. Now, suppose if you randomly ran into this channel and you're like, I don't know anything about any watches, then maybe you actually don't know about this. But obviously, we're going to be talking about the Audemars Piguet Royal Oak. This, in this day and age, as seen as the watch that launched the integrated sports watch format. It's given a lot of credit, maybe a little too much credit, regarding allowing watch companies to overcome the quartz crisis. But the idea of luxury mechanical watches, I do think you could really trace it to this move, doing something in steel, but putting it in a luxury price tag and still doing a mechanical movement. So anyway, for those that are curious, this is early 70s at this point. So we basically skipped the 60s. Again, the article didn't really focus on a lot of designs that he was doing from the 1960s. So we get here, Audemars Piguet, it's early 1970s, 1971. And they're realizing that their sales are going down because quartz movements are becoming more obtainable and the watches out of Japan are taking a lot of market share. So they decide, okay, well, we need a new line of watches. And so they contacted Gérald Genta. And so he just, my understanding is in fairly short order, rapidly created this watch. The biggest thing that I think jumps out to most people then and now, and here's a picture of one of the original reference numbers. hence the rust and stuff. But I thought this is a nice, good photo I could blow up pretty well. I'll see if I can expand it even a little more for you guys. Is the bezel. So very recognizable case shape. You've got the screws around the bezel. Stands out quite a bit for that reason alone. It had a lot of finishing involved. You have this sort of waffle pattern to the dial. Again, it's pretty simple, time plus date. I don't think this reference has a seconds hand, but and the octagon shape, of course, of the bezel as well. It wasn't just the screws that make it stand out; it's the actual shape. Another big change for the time period is, bear in mind, they weren't really familiar with integrated sports bracelet watches. So the idea of integrating the bracelet into the case was another bold, design decision that Genta ran with when he went ahead and did this for Audemars Piguet. Now, my understanding is, I always think about Hublot and how it's their dial supposed to be like inspired by a porthole on a ship. This is supposedly Genta designed it with the inspiration of a diver's helmet. So that's what the bezel with the screws is supposed to be invoking. And so anyway, I believe you can still, like, the movement that was used was caliber 2121. I've read that some of the Royal Oak Jumbos still use that movement today. And anyway, it got launched, and it was at the time 3,300 Swiss francs, which was for a steel watch absolutely absurd for the time being. For that time, that was absurd. It was ridiculously expensive. And as a number of you who have ever looked into the Royal Oak may know, while we sing its praises today and talk about how iconic and impactful it ended up being, this was kind of like Rolex Daytonas when they first came out. This was not a popular watch. This watch did not do well for Audemars Piguet, but they stuck with it, and its popularity greatly expanded over time, and today has sort of achieved that, not sort of, it has achieved hype watch status. And in fact, the Royal Oak line is so iconic at this point. Like, over half of AP's design catalog is inspired from it, like Royal Oak or Royal Oak Jumbos, Royal Oak Offshores. It's like even when they move away from what Genta did, they've just leaned so hard into Royal Oak. I think a lot of people half jokingly will sometimes say AP is they call it the Royal Oak Company, because that's what it's known for. Now, again, he was contacted in 71 to do the design. The watch came out at Basel in 1972. So that's why it was the first major integrated sports watch, luxury sports watch. And I'd read a quote that's in that article that I have linked in the description, that Genta considered the Royal Oak, and the quote is, masterpiece of his career. So it definitely is the major icon of his stuff. And personally, while I am not particularly fond of it myself, it's grown on me over time. So I'm pulling up Tuna's chat comment here saying that the Royal Oak integrated bracelet era doesn't do it for him. And when I first saw it, it didn't really work for me very well either. It has grown on me over time, whereas the Nautilus has not, which is another design of his, which followed this, and we will be moving to that watch next. But yes, it's quirky, right? It's a quirky thing with the shape of the bezel and all that. I think part of the thing is, for us nowadays, and I think a lot of you will resonate with the statement, but we see so many knockoffs, homages, and I don't just mean clones, but also just things that are designed in the style, or you can clearly tell the inspiration comes from things like the Royal Oak, that we're very saturated with it. I mean, a case in point, a counterexample of he never designed for Rolex, to my knowledge, at least. I didn't see anything. I don't think he ever touched Rolex. But you'll often hear when people, sometimes when they'll look at something like a Submariner, and they'll go, this watch is really boring. Why is it so expensive, and why is it so popular? I'm not understanding that it's boring because everyone copied it. It was the first to look the way it does. So the Submariner has inspired so many dive watches. You see them all over the place. So when you can get the same basic look out of an Invicta, or a Seiko, or whatever, you'll find something that's kind of reminiscent, and you'll be like, well, why is the Submariner special? Again, I think that's kind of the thing with the Royal Oak. It's like, we see a lot like this. I see at this point. I mean, we're going to get to another Genta design when we hit the Ingenieur, about like doing like fasteners on the surface of the bezel, for example. And anytime I see any, no matter what the shape is, I immediately go Royal Oak, Royal Oak, Royal Oak. But at least I know that's what the history is. Someone else who might have first seen a bunch of bolts around the edge of the Igenera might think it came first. So it's just one, it's just one of those things. I'm laughing because I saw Tuna's comment about the Nautilus is the ugliest sister of this bunch. I do concur. What are the flanks or the flanges or whatever, the sides of the case and the flare out on that, it just never has worked for me. And Neff says, supposedly Genta designed the oyster quartz. I think the first one. Okay. If he did, I hadn't heard that, but I haven't looked a lot into oyster quartz, and it wasn't mentioned in the article that it's serving as my guide today. Not all these images are from that article. Well, okay. Well, if Tim Masso has forgotten more about watches than I will ever learn. So I would typically, my rule of thumb is to defer to his knowledge because he's not usually very wrong, and he's not wrong very often, I should say. And whenever I've heard him be wrong, he's corrected himself, and it's usually like a reference number getting mixed up with like the subsequent reference number. Usually, really, really simple stuff. But okay, that's interesting though. That might be something I explore more later, but probably not because I'm not particularly interested in the oyster quartz in and of itself. Nautilus. Okay, I talked about how ugly this was, but I'm not alone in that thought. However, it is iconic, and Nautilus watches today command more than Royal Oaks do. So it's definitely worth discussing. So this watch did follow the Royal Oak. So after that happened, Patek Philippe decided they needed something. They say the Royal Oak out of Audemars Piguet. Again, I mentioned that came out at Basel Fair in 1972. So Patek is like, we need something like that. And they, over time, well, again, as we just noted, Royal Oak didn't initially do very well, but then it started to have success. And so Patek decided, as they saw that happen, as it was growing, the idea of luxury steel was a concept that they decided they needed to embrace. But they waited for a few years first because they wanted to be sure that was actually going to be necessary to do. So the Nautilus actually came out, again, Basel Fair, 76. So it was 4 years later. And anyway, this kind of like Hublot, I talked about porthole designs by Hublot, and that's what that's known for. This is supposed to be inspired by transatlantic ship porthole. So that's what its theme is. Obviously, you can see from the photo I've loaded up, and this is one of the original reference numbers. This we have this like oblong, I guess, oblong shape. According to the article that I'm pulling from, is technically octagonal in nature, probably because of it's hard to tell with the bezel, obviously. But lume, so again, sports watch theme here, luxury steel theme here, and named for as you probably would have speculated, the boat, the sub from 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. So anyway, it was large for the time. This is 42 millimeters. And I mean, that would be seen as a not small watch today. Probably be seen as a regular size, but very large, very recognizable. And I would argue, despite me not particularly caring for it, that this is the most prestigious of the luxury integrated sports watch in steel, bar none. I think easily, followed by the Royal Oak. Maybe that's because Patek has just produced less. That's where I lean towards on that. But anyway, very, very, very big deal when it. But of course, Patek played it safe, conservative company, and they waited to see if the Royal Oak was going to do well. And then once it finally did, they're like, okay, well, we need to do something. We're in the quartz crisis, and we're not selling as well as we used to. Also, so. Neff says, in my opinion, that is not a good looking watch, especially in profile with the bolt looking things on the side. Yeah, it's really the side that gets me. The texture as well, this horizontal striping, it looks very of its era to me. The very 70s, but not quite kitsch enough to like Zenith on some of their A revivals, like was it 385? I've been tempted by that one with the smoked dial and the ladder bracelet. Like it's super 70s. It's so 70s, like it's embracing it. It knows it's 70s. Whereas this, Feels like this was like cutting edge, like fashion in 76. And then today I look at it and I go, it just doesn't quite work for me. But I mean, when you've got an icon, what's what are you gonna do? I don't know. It's just I yeah, I'm kind of in Tuna's boat here. From the company that brought you the Calatrava, it is bloody ugly. And the Calatrava is my favorite Patek design. I mean, again, they have some Calatravas I don't really care for much either. But like, if I were to get a Patek, it would probably be a Calatrava. I just think of dress watches with them. I don't really care much for the Aquanaut either. I Patek sports watches just do not work for me. They're all too this, like oblong, maybe is the best way. They're just too oblong. I don't want oblong. I think it's weird. I find it weird. So let's go with the third integrated sports watch, right? The one the one that recently got redesigned and announced at Watches and Wonders this year, and was the one watch I saw readily whined about being too much money. I don't know if just everyone bandwagoned on that or it really is, but I think Federico from Federico Talks Watches even said it should have been like the price they priced it at. He thought you should get two for that price. So anyway, the Engineer wasn't new. That was just a new design to it. The Engineer had been around for a while, and we're going to focus on Genta's iteration because the Engineer predates Genta as well. Again, kind of like how he came in and worked on the Constellation. He came in and he worked on the Engineer. So basically, the Engineer as a watch line dated back to the 1950s. But they decided, again, it's the 1970s, a change is needed. So they contacted Genta, and my understanding is he was contacted to, I think he started working on this watch. I put it after the Nautilus because I think he was contacted in 76 or so to do his design. Not quite sure when it came out. The article I was looking at didn't really specify. I saw another article that mentioned he had, I think it was 76 when IWC tapped him to do the design. Again, page, obviously it looks a little bit like a Nautilus and a little bit like a Royal Oak. And I think that's we're starting to get this feeling of maybe he's mixing and matching the ideas that he likes and what he's recently worked on. I don't know. Like the Nautilus, this is 42 millimeters, so that's straight out of what he just did. It's not nearly, apparently the original case was very, very thick. He went thin with this. Incidentally, I didn't point that out, but that's something that's true with the Royal Oak and the Nautilus, is those are thin watches. So he went thin here as well. He wanted to make it look more sporty. So here we go. We have that sort of, we have the integrated bracelet coming back. We have the exposed screws on the bezel, which is very Royal Oak-like, though obviously he went with a round bezel now instead of what he did with the Royal Oak. And the case and the bezel is more streamlined. So very, very, he tried to do a lot very, I think of it as 70s sleek, where we want everything kind of just sort of merged together. And so that's what he tried to accomplish with this watch. And it did work for IWC. This watch is not nearly as talked about or hyped as the Nautilus and the Royal Oak. But IWC did continue to use the Genta format all the way into the late 1980s. So they got like a decade out of it, which is pretty good. And there's some elements here that you'll probably still be able to see if you look at the Engineer collection that's happened since him. However, it was, in my mind, it was pretty derivative at this point. Derivative is other work he'd been doing in the 70s. So while there's some aspects to this watch I actually prefer, I like it a great deal more than the Nautilus aesthetically. It just doesn't really resonate with me either, though. So it's just one of those things. But hey, D Underhay, welcome to the live stream. He says, hi, interesting topic. Nautilus is horrible. The Royal Oak done wrong. Well, this is the one where I feel like we took with Jeff Goldblum, the Fly. I think if I've seen the Fly, I was real little when I saw it, so I don't really remember it very well. But I feel like maybe the Nautilus went into the machine, and unfortunately a little bit of Royal Oak was in there also, and then that's kind of what this happened. Or maybe the Royal Oak was supposed to go in the machine and there was a little bit of a Nautilus accidentally got in there too, and so we got this sort of aspect. Like the sides of the case aren't bothersome to me here, so I like that. That solves my problem with the with one of my problems with the Nautilus. Also doesn't have that horizontal line texturing like we got static on our TV screen. So I like that a lot as well. I think this is very text heavy though. So compared to, like the Royal Oak, I like the Royal Oak dial a great deal better. Actually, overall, I would say it's just cleaner. I prefer the Royal Oak to the iGenure, but I definitely prefer the iGenure to the Nautilus. Nautilus just doesn't work for me. So regarding the pricing, which I kind of opened with on the current line of the iGenure, let me throw the Genta picture back up. Neff says it's way overpriced. Real shame because they nailed it, but over 5 figures, count me out. That's my limit. I mean, everything with watch pricing lately has gotten very, very odd. Some of it I think is driven by supply chain. Some of it, though, I honestly at this stage I'm feeling that that's a bit overstated at this point. I think most of the supply chain issues affecting the watch industry are probably solved, but there's also some of this like keeping up with the Joneses thing where I feel like they're feeling when they see other companies raise their prices. This is like what I think is going on with JLC. They are like, well, if Rolex is raising their prices and where we think we're positioned versus them, or where we think we're positioned versus Vacheron, and so then they raise their prices 4 times in 2 years. And anyway, I whined about that a couple live streams ago, so I don't want to go back to complaining ad nauseum about it. But definitely, yeah, I was without knowing what all exactly they changed for the other than the case on the IWC. I think some of the blowback was the movement as well. But I didn't understand how they derived the price point, especially where they were once at. And welcome to the live stream, Matt, who says, yes, Nautilus is hideous. I was trying to think the Breguet, the new Breguet Type 20. They added that. Isn't that like, it's almost double what the last one was. And when they discontinued the last one, like 3 or 4 years ago, I was just like absolutely shocked. Plus it's unfair. Well, again, we all have our own opinions. I don't think the new Breguet Type 20 looks nearly as good as the old one. I don't understand why they stuck a date on a watch that didn't have a date historically. I mean, I do. They think they're going to sell more, but I think they're wrong. I think you're wrong, Breguet. Just listen to me. Trust me. So let's jump to the Pasha, right? Okay, so this one I was familiar with. I've never. The Pasha was one of those avant-garde designs that really didn't work for me when I first saw it, and then it grew on me quite a bit. I don't know if I would ever actually own a Pasha, but it's very distinct and in a way that I actually find more cool than weird at this stage. So just one of those things. But so in terms of the Pasha, while I knew it was a Genta design, I never really looked much into it. So we're in the 80s now. Okay. So Genta's now, his career has gone really, really well. The 70s did quite well for him. I mean, he designed for 2 of the Holy Trinity for sure. I don't know if he did anything for Vacheron, but gave them very, very successful watches in the Royal Oak and the Nautilus, regardless of what we may think of their designs. And then, of course, a similar sort of format for IWC, which worked well for them also. So a lot of brands were trying to get a hold of Genta by the 1980s because he was seen as like liquid gold. Like anything he touched would be coated in his greatness. And so the Pasha already existed for kind of like, again, when we talked about the late 1950s and Genta modifying the Constellation for Omega, Pasha was already in Cartier's lineup, but they wanted it changed. It had over time moved in a more dress watch oriented direction. And so Cartier wanted a design that was bold. Like they felt it was just becoming too much of a, I guess, conservative dress watch. And they also wanted it to be round. And my understanding is at the time, Cartier's inventory was various was various shapes over time. We've seen all sorts of weird shapes out of Cartier. And so anyway, I think I'm kind of rambling this. Let me jump back to with Genta. So, all right, too much dress watch. Pasha's gone that route. Cartier's like, no, we want this to be like a bold sports watch statement piece for our brand. So they contact Genta. And so they brought him in and he did it. But it's interesting because it's got a lot of sports watch aesthetics, but he did it in gold. Now he did a round watch, and Cartier hadn't been doing a lot of round watches in their history up till this point. So this was, while round watches are very typical for a lot of watch brands, that wasn't really where Cartier was playing in the space. And so he goes in and gives him a round watch, which was pretty unique look for that company. Then he also goes in and takes this idea of doing these really interesting lugs. I'm going to zoom out a little bit so you can kind of see that. Oh, I'm cycling. There we go. I'm actually on a first series auction site for these photos. They had some good photos, so that's why we're rocking it. But you can see a really cool lug designs. So that was in the original Pasha. So I think, according to the article, again, that's in the description if you want to read more about this, Vendrome lugs are what this style is called, Vendrome lugs. Of course, we got the blue sapphire in the crown, which is something that Cartier is known for. And this Pasha, the modern Pasha de Cartiers are very much in this format. In fact, I had to search when I loaded this image up. I searched for Genta First Pasha because so many modern ones look like his format, and I wanted to show you a quote unquote authentic one that he came up with. So anyway, that's what he did. He did it in gold, but it's very much a sports watch while also being in gold. And it was a huge success. I mean, that's why you see Cartier continue to do this sort of format for the Pasha. It was very, again, it was Genta, and he could do no wrong at this point. So this watch, I actually, again, as I mentioned, it was when I first saw the Pasha, it was so loud and in my face, and it was off-putting to me. And as I've mentioned many times on this channel, I know myself. So my gut instinct whenever I first see things, like a lot of watch collectors, I suppose, is I'm like, I don't like it. It's weird. It's different. So anytime I see anything kind of avant-garde, almost always my immediate reaction is, ugh. And then some of those stay forever. And then some of them morph over time. And it's like, you know what? I kind of get it. Once I've gotten used to it, I've started to like it. And so, well, I've always been a big Santos fan. The Pasha is probably my second favorite out of their line. I don't know if I could pull off anything I want. I believe in myself. I could pull it off if I wanted to. I don't know if I would ever buy one. Not in gold, I don't think. Maybe in steel I would, just given the size and the look and stuff. I think it's already bold enough without being in yellow gold. But anyway, it's a really cool dial layout, super easy to read. There's a lot. There's nothing. No one's really. There probably are some that have cloned it, but I was going to say there's no one who's really cloned it. Like when I see Pashas, they've been Pashas, and so it's just one of those things that I think is really distinct. So it's actually grown on me quite a bit. Catching up on the chat, a little bit back to when I was transitioning over to talking about the Pasha, Neff bringing back the Mark 20 that I mentioned on bracelet. That when you compare the price to a Mark 20 on bracelet that has the same movement, it's a $4,000+ increase. Yes. I think I said the Type 20. I should have said the Mark 20. I think the Type 20 might be an IWC watch, or is that or are they both Mark 20s? I don't know. They both got 20s in there. They're 20s, like a pilot watch with IWC, and then there's the Breguet pilot watch as well. Tuna says, actually, I do quite like the Pasha. Yes, it's simple and it's weird. And maybe I shouldn't say weird. It's bold. Like even the fonts, like the font choices are pretty cool. I think so far of all the watches we've talked about, this is probably my favorite design of his, just because it's so distinct. But the idea of kind of merging a dress watch and a sports watch in this fashion, like when I look at a Royal Oak and a Nautilus, I don't see a dress watch and a sports watch merged. I see a sports watch that got priced like a luxury dress watch. But with this, I see the idea of smashing the two ideas together. And like, I assume as a designer at this stage in his career, he was confident enough in his own abilities that he knew he could make it work. And the sales proved that. Koji says, Heisek designed the Vacheron 222, even though many times Genta got mistakenly attributed to that design. Okay, interesting. I didn't know who designed the 222. I personally had not heard, I've not seen that misnomer of Genta being responsible, but I haven't done a lot of research on the 222. I just know when they brought it back that it was almost a one for, other than the movement, it was almost a 1-for-1 recreation. Which I love the Vacheron 222. I think, again, that's one of those watches that 70s kitsch, but it works because it's like we know we're the 70s and we're taking that and hugging it with both arms as tight as we can. Not like the Nautilus, which is like we're wanting to be fashionable, and that just fell out of fashion and they didn't change the design. Neff says, here's a watch that belongs on the Nautilus. The the boat. I mean, I respect it, but it's not for me. And Neff says Type 20 is Breguet, Mark 20 is IWC. They don't make it easy. Wow. These watch people make everything hard, Neff, but we do the best we can. Character watches. When I hear Genta, the first thing I think of is the Nautilus and the Royal Oak. But the second thing I think of are the character watches, specifically Mickey Mouse. And this is just one of many that he ended up doing. So I stuck this in here after the Pasha because I think the character watch kind of surge in his career happened at some point in the 80s is when he got started with that. And then he just kind of kept iterating and running with it. But for some background. Now, Genta actually did found his own brand way before the 80s. He did it in 69. So, and that was where he wanted to be avant-garde. And I think maybe that's why some people of the era might have been surprised when they saw in the 80s, like Cartier do the Pasha, and it was so different to everything. And Cartier already had some pretty unique looks, but they were, he had his own brand to do the more fun stuff because he was still obviously getting brought in like as a contractor to do things with Patek and Audemars Piguet and things like that. So one of the things he wanted to do is cartoon watches in the 80s. He was like, that was just a space he was really interested in. There was a recent interview with his wife on the Superlative podcast with Ariel Adams interviews her. And I do recommend you go and seek out that. It's the most recent episode as of the time of this recording, I believe, unless they might. No, I think they just had one new episode come out. I haven't heard it yet. So it's very, very recent in the catalog, but I would recommend listening to it. She does a really good job. She was very involved with the brand and his work as of the 80s. And so she talks a lot about Genta really wanting to do fun. Like he thought watches should be fun. And he wanted to do a lot of fun watches. And they had a number of struggles because at the time when they would display the watches, like the high horology brands really looked down on them. Like they didn't want them in the same cases at the watch fairs and stuff. It's interesting. So I recommend it because it's a fascinating story. But anyway, he really wanted to do it. And he approached Disney in the early 80s about putting characters on dials. And he came up with a partnership with them. And as the interview from Superlative indicated from his wife, my understanding is he spoke to Bob Eisner, and Eisner wanted a custom watch. I think a Bambi watch was what she said. And so he did that. And like in exchange, he told them he wanted to do a Mickey watch, and they gave him the license to do ultra expensive Mickey watches. So that's kind of how the partnership happened, according to her. So anyway, over the years, he did a bunch of Disney themed watches in particular with a lot of different complications. I'm showing you an example with a retrograde minute and a jump hour is, I believe, what this format is. So for example, you're seeing Mickey, it's 8 o'clock, as you can see in the 4:30 position, or 8. And then according to the minutes, it's like 8:23. So again, interesting complication. And that's what's always interested me about these watches. I'm not a Mickey Mouse fan, so I've never seriously shopped for a Mickey watch, but I liked the complications that the Genta designs ran with. And he did other characters besides Mickey as well. But anyway, over time, the watches became extremely popular. And they were, when they launched in the 80s, like some of them were like $5,000. So very pricey for the time period in particular. But some of these, and that's kind of like out of the gate stuff. Like he did watches in precious metals with these characters. He did watches with diamonds on them. So they're quite collectible at this point. And they I think Bulgari has some like tribute watches in their collection that does some of these sort of designs, because we'll get into that. But Genta sold his company, so Bulgari or Bulgari, I don't know how to pronounce it, has some stuff that's more modern that does some of these same things. So you can find things that won't have the Genta branding on them, or maybe they do have the branding. I need to go. I haven't really checked what Bulgari's been doing with the lineup. So Underhay says, I do like that retrograde golf design, even though I'm not a Mickey Mouse fan. Yeah, and I'm not a golf fan either. I played golf one time and I lost the sensation in my thumb for half a year because I didn't hold the club right. So I'd like to see this done with something else. I don't know what else, but I mean, Come on, retrogrades are fun. We can figure something out. Honestly, I'd wear it anyway. As cool it is, I just don't want to spend that much money, given I'm not enamored with the theme. So, yes, very interesting. So these I think are that's what I always think of when I think of Genta. Besides the Nautilus and Royal Oak, of course. So this is another watch I was not familiar with. It's the last one in the article of the description. We have a few more because again, we're kind of going chronologically. This is the Gérald Genta Grand Sonnerie. I'd heard of this watch. I'd never actually seen it before until I read the article. So it's now the mid 90s, 1995. Genta already, he's as famous. I'd say he's probably as famous then as he is now. Like today, he is the most famous watch designer. So he wanted to do something unique because, again, that interview with his wife pointed out one of the big things with Gérald, as she said, is that he wanted to do new things. So he would, he'd do a design, it would be successful or whatever, but eventually he usually, in fairly short order, wants to move on to some other concept. Like that's the creation was the fun part, which is, I think, is the case with a lot of designers that we hear about. So he came up with this. It was a 5-year project of just 5 years of R&D. And he got a movement from Pierre, I'm going to mess up his name probably, Pierre Michel Gollet, who worked for Frank Mueller. And so, because Genta didn't make the movement. But this, at the time, was in 95, one of the most complicated watches that had ever been created. It has over 1,000 parts in it, a variety of complications. It's got a Westminster 4-hammer chime. It's a perpetual calendar. And so in a lot of ways, it was Genta demonstrating that as a designer, he could work with high complication. It wasn't just, a bunch of really fashionable designs where what we are drawn to with the Royal Oak and the Nautilus and the Ageneur and the Pasha, that's not complicated. Those were thin watches, but other than that, they're like all time plus date at best, not complicated stuff. He started to play around with more interesting complications like retrogrades and stuff, as we saw with the character watches, but again, not the most complicated sorts of things. I have a Mr. Jones watch with a jump hour, for example, on, and that was like a $320 watch. So this was his demonstration of what he could do with, taking advantage and doing this integration and working with all these different complications and such. So this watch is extremely rare. It, as near as I understand, it's estimated they made 25 of them, though I don't think the actual count's known. Each one had a different design. So this is just one of them. So the watch, when it came out in the mid 90s, was about $900,000 US. And I'm sure they go for quite a bit more today. But anyway, so the Grand Sonnerie. Nev says, I have seen that watch. I think they even did it in Palladium. Really steampunk design. Yeah. And I again, I'm kind of curious because this was from the article that I have linked in the description. They showed this one image, but each one looked different. So I'd be really curious to see some of the other stuff versus this particular format, which is a really clean one, but in some ways gives me kind of like a Pasha vibe. I'm really curious what some of the other ones that he did looked like. But this was not the end of his career. So we mentioned Bulgari, right? I mentioned it. You guys sat here politely and were just listening to me, but I mentioned Bulgari. So let's go ahead and jump to that. He was tapped by them, and this design that I'm showing you, this was actually originally going to be for their atelier in Rome. It was supposed to be Rome specific, and it is modeled on a Roman coin, an ancient Roman coin, which makes sense to me. I'd studied, not like professionally, I'd studied Roman history though, and I remember seeing some stuff from the coin. So when I saw this, it resonated with me. I wasn't sure why. So knowing that it was based on some of their coinage makes a lot of sense. This though ended up, it's an icon. I've seen this actually. To me, my first thought always is it looks really fashion watchy, mostly because it says Bulgari around the bezel. How brand in your face can you get? Rolex doesn't throw their name around like that. So anyway, but this is what the watch is called, the Bulgari. So again, Bulgari, when they did this, it was supposed to be for their shop in Rome. But it ended up being a worldwide phenomenon for the company. And so, I mean, it ended up being a major staple in their catalog. And I believe it's still available at this point. But while this model ended up becoming really, really successful, in the early 2000s, Bulgari went ahead and bought Gérald Genta's company. So that's when he retired, about a decade before he passed away. He went ahead and sold off to the Gérald Genta company. He sold it to Bulgari. And so they started taking models that were Genta models from Gérald Genta, the brand Gérald Genta, and then selling them under Bulgari with the name Bulgari on them. And a lot of them actually are influenced off of this particular watch that you see on the screen. So mentioning that, let's go ahead and jump to some more of what Bulgari's done with Gérald Genta. So the Octo. Now, this one, I'm going to note, it's a question mark. We already talked about, like, did Genta do oyster quartz or how Genta was sometimes misattributed to doing Vacherons 222. All right. It's not, apparently it's debated whether or not Genta designed himself the Octo. So that it's unknown, or as near as I can tell, it's still unknown. According to the article, it's unknown. Some think that he did design it, and some think that Bulgari just took some of his other 8-sided designs that we know Genta did and made some of their own modifications, and it was an homage, basically. And so you see here, I've loaded an image of side by side, so you can see an actual Gérald Genta branded 8-sided watch that he had under his company branding. And now here on the right is the Octo. If you weren't, a lot of you are probably familiar with the Bulgari Octo. It's very famous. But again, so I think it was in 2000, early 2000. I think it was 2000 itself, though. Bulgari bought Gérald Genta, the brand, and got the rights to all his designs under that brand. And it was right after that the Octo launched. So again, whether he had already sketched it up or they just poached it from this other image, you be the judge. I don't know the answer. Their version is different. Obviously, it's a lot more blocky, a lot more, I would say, industrial is the way I would describe it. The way the article that mentioned this, I think, described it as brooding. I don't know if it's brooding, but I will say it is very industrial. So I think everyone can see the inspiration coming from Magenta design regardless. A very simple dial, clean layout, not as nearly in your face about the branding as the Bulgari is, but the case is actually more complicated than the dial, which is sort of the trademark Genta look that I think we think of as of the Royal Oak onwards. So anyway, there are so many Octos at this point. This line has done very well for Bulgari, and that's before we even get into the Octo Finissimos and the Ultra Thins that they have done in that lineup. But very, very major watch for Bulgari since they've acquired Genta. So that leaves us with one last watch that's touched on. I'd never seen this watch before I did this, got ready for this video. And so this is a Gérald Charles, and let me look up what the name is. Again, the article didn't have these in chronological order. The Maestro. I should remember that. All right, so this is also a 2000 watch. So I stuck it here at the end. So while Gérald Genta in 2000 sold Gérald Genta, the brand, to Bulgari, that's also when he founded his final brand, Gérald Charles. So he wanted to design watches, his own watches under his own name. And one of the last designs that was ever produced from him himself was the Maestro. I'm not sure what year the Maestro came out. But again, it goes back to sort of hallmark Genta with simple dial, interesting, more complicated casework. So the case is oblong. We kind of talked about how oblong, in my view at least, doesn't look that great on the Nautilus. I think it looks pretty cool here, though. So what we've got going on is the bezel itself is actually an octagon, but the case is also an octagon with this indentation or crease at the bottom. So it's weird if you think about it. If you stripped everything else away and just looked at the shape, it's a very odd decision to do a shape like this for a watch, but it ends up looking pretty elegant in my view. And I actually really like this case shape. The dial, sunburst, and again, longtime viewers know I love sunburst dials. So sunburst is just it's firing on all cylinders for me to go ahead and do that. It's a time plus date watch. Again, super simple. You can see he went with oblong markers on all the hours except for the 12, 3, 6, and 9, where they just did the dot format. So I again, you don't have to have Arabic numerals on it, but those quarter positions all stand out really distinctly without detracting away from the other indices that are applied. And it's a larger case, but not as large as the Nautilus and the iGen. This is 40 millimeters. So, and again, like Genta liked to do with his integrated bracelet watches, very thin, 8 millimeters in this instance. So they have done a number of iterations of the Maestro. Supposedly, the case shape and the strap itself, probably this patterning on the strap, is inspired by the pyramids, which I can definitely see it on the strap. I'm not quite sure on the case, but I do think the case looks very, very cool. So anyway, I'd never heard of Gerald Charles before putting this video together. I'd never heard of the Maestro before. Don't think I'd ever seen it before. Definitely, I think this is a very attractive watch. So I like it quite a bit. So Tuna says, Genta or not, the Octo is a very nice looking watch. Yeah, I've looked a little bit, not serious, like I'm not shopped for them. I'm not seriously entertained buying an Octo, but I've gone and looked, and there's some, I don't really care for the example I showed you guys. I'll throw it back here on the screen again. I don't know. I think in my instance, I like everything but the small seconds. This decision to place it at the 730 position, I find kind of odd. Like Grand Seiko did this for quite a while on spring drives with their power reserve, but it always felt a little more balanced to me because there was also usually a date window here at the 3. I don't know. It just it's unique. I'll say that. I don't hate it. I don't know. I like some of the other Octos a little bit more that they've done. I've heard the Octo Finissimos. A lot of people love those, but I do hear you want to try them on because they wear weird, and a lot of people find them uncomfortable. But this is not a Finissimo on the screen. Then Neff, I'm going to load up the image back here of the Gérald Charles Maestro again because he says, I always like the Gérald Charles, but they're very expensive. Reminds me of Daniel Roth. Okay. I have not priced them. I know nothing about the pricing. So now I guess I'm a little sad, but only a little sad because I'm telling myself no more dress watches. And maybe he thought of this as a sports watch, but I don't know. Yeah, no, I could see it as a sports watch, but Under 8 says that Gérald Charles, I think the case would look better the upside down with the odd part at the top. It's a bit like a car radiator then. You know, let me zoom back out. I had a similar, I didn't have a similar, I won't say a thought. I won't say I didn't. I think maybe you're right. When I saw this, when I first saw it, I wondered briefly, why didn't they put it at the top? And then I think in my head canon, the reason was, in a way, maybe it helps with the date window that it's kind of like, because you already got a framed item down there. So then maybe that helps draw attention to the date in a way that's, I don't know, aesthetically pleasing. But yeah, I think, especially if it was a no date. Yeah, I hadn't thought radiator, but I thought kind of like how some windows, like you have an arch window that then boxes out, kind of like a stained glass window, maybe. I kind of wondered a little bit like that, where it'd be like an arch case. That'd be an interesting. Someone's surely done it, like an arch case at the top, but then it's really rigidly like harsh edged, like a rectangle, until you reach that top where you've got like the kind of like an oblonging, like some window designs have done. So curious. It could look really good though. But anyway, those are all of them I wanted to do. I just thought it'd be fun to do kind of a history recap. We talk Gérald Genta. We as enthusiasts and collectors talk Gérald Genta all the time, but we usually limit ourselves by and large to the Royal Oak and the Nautilus. Sometimes lately, in particular, the iGen, and that's pretty much it. So I just thought it'd be kind of fun to go through it. Plus, I'd never looked into his career until prepping, so it gave me a good excuse to do a little history project on my own. That's something I used to do in pinball, one of my other hobbies. I used to write articles on the history, and I'd like to focus on history of things that weren't already covered in that case. So Genta, of course, has been covered quite extensively. But Anyway, I hope you enjoyed it. If you didn't catch it live and you're watching the recording, I hope you found it interesting. Follow that link if you want to read. There's a lot more detail on the article that came out earlier this year. There are a lot of other places that have done pieces on Genta. And I also, that superlative episode, I highly recommend it with his wife that she just did not all that long ago. She's still active. Like the Gérald Genta brand is back. They're doing stuff. And so I think there's a lot of really interesting things that are coming that are tied to the designs that he's done. He is an icon for a reason. And I think it'd be very hard not to find at least one watch out of his extensive career that you don't like. So it's just interesting to know about. But anyway, thanks everyone. I hope you have a really good weekend. I'll plan to do one next Saturday. And otherwise, just stay tuned. Maybe I'll do some pre-recorded in between. We'll see what happens. But take care, everybody.